Well, it's week 9. Welcome. Reminder for anybody that's not seeing the calendar that you have a break after this week. Hooray! So I'm going to, let's get going. For those, I've just hit record. So those of you that were not present tonight, workshop, we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A about the assignment just with the people that are present. So questions come up out of the stuff that we talk about, feel free to flick me an email. Heads up that I'm not at work during the vacation period either, though. So if you need some assistance, go through the Bachelor inbox and copy me in so that somebody sees it and gets back to you in the break. Okay, let's acknowledge that we are sitting on land that was not ceded. Pay my respect to the Darug elders, past, present, and emerging for this lovely country that I sit on. And pay respect to their continuing connection to culture and land and waterways. I think it's a nice way to start. Quick agenda for tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about why being trauma-informed in an organisation is important and what some of the challenges are. So we've spoken a lot about neurobiology and like the importance of a practitioner being trauma-informed. Towards the end of this semester, so kind of starting from this week, we really sort of flip it onto the organisation and why it's important for organisations to be trauma-informed, what it looks like to be a trauma-informed organisation. So we look at the Missouri model, and then we look at the SAMHSA model, which is kind of the guiding principles to create that trauma-informed organisation. A heads up to look, there is a bit of a spectrum, and I'm going to talk about that in terms of becoming fully trauma-informed. I would suggest that there's a small proportion of organisations in Australia that are fully trauma-informed. I think we are we're starting to get trauma aware and we're conscious of it, but I don't know that we are fully trauma-informed in terms of too many workplaces yet. So when we talk about these frameworks and these models, it's really like ideal scenario and not often what we see happening in place, sadly, and what our experience is. So let's start really quickly. Look, there's only 2 of you guys. I know that there's probably little people and stuff in the background, but I'll just throw it out to you because you're here. Why do you think it's important for an organisation to be trauma-informed? Any ideas? Pressure's on, hey? Only 2 people.
I guess it filters down, doesn't it? Like it's something, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I cut you off then.
No. I didn't have really anything to say. It's just, if your organisation is doing it right, then your workers are probably doing it right.
Yeah, 100%. It's like good leadership. It cascades down. So yeah, important for an organisation to be trauma-informed because it does. It means that your workforce is then protected, your clients are protected, and you're hopefully kind of enacting some change in the community. I think by extension, why is it hard? When I have a bigger class, I usually split you off into nice little breakout rooms and you go off and talk about this stuff. Why is it hard for organizations to be trauma-informed? Just keep that question in your head, right? If what we are looking for is the gold standard, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, why is it so hard for us to get there? What are the barriers? What are the brick walls? So as we move through the models tonight, just keep that question in your mind. And I'll be interested to know, maybe at the end of the week, once you've moved through the material, if you've got a bit more of an understanding of what those challenges are. Okay, why is it important? Because we know that a high proportion of employees will at any given time have lived experience or will have been currently experiencing trauma, particularly if you have a female-oriented workforce, which most of community services is, unless you're in higher management. Think back to the stats we spoke about earlier in the semester in terms of the cost to the workplace, right? When you've got multiple employees, off on work cover leave, when you've got from a, the culture of the organization, think about what it feels like if you've ever been in that situation where you don't feel psychologically safe in a workplace. If you see behavior that doesn't align with your values or the organization's kind of principles or value statement, if the organization doesn't protect the people that speak up, if they have a bit of a practice of speak up but not much happens, if there are power imbalances that don't allow safety, if the leave entitlements aren't clear, or if there's no clear policies around staff wellbeing and entitlements to leave, where there's strong cultures of productivity over and above wellbeing, those kind of cultures are not the ones we tend to stick it out at. We don't last long. And we sometimes damage people in the process, sadly. You guys, anyone who's had me before will hear me bang on about Vicki Reynolds all the time. She talks a lot about collective care. So this concept of like, we have a duty of care, not just to our clients, but to each other's as workers. And that too often there is a very heavy focus on our care for clients and making sure everything is client-centered. And that's important because we should always hold the client at the center, but we also need to invest in each other. And if we are truly client-centered, then by holding each other in the center of that work and looking after each other, we're giving our best service to our client. So we can actually, bubble wrap the organization and really focus on looking after each other and ourselves and still give a client-led service. I think all of us in the past have probably not left a workplace that we didn't really like anymore because we cared about other people or we had friendships and investments with some of the other staff. So even though the work wasn't as fulfilling or enjoyable, we still stayed longer than we probably should have because we really liked the people that we were working alongside and we valued them. So that's really the foundation of collective care, because the work's not going to be enjoyable all the time. We're not going to go home every day thinking, oh, I got a really good outcome for that client. That's not the reality. But if we go home every day feeling a little bit like we've invested in the people around us, they're invested in me, and if I've had a crap day, I can call someone or I can have a chat on my way home with somebody that I work with, and that will kind of blank slate it for the next day. What is harder, I think, is when you clash with or you don't value the people that you work alongside, because then it's really hard to find ways to, invest in their well-being as well as your own. So I think in the face of what we've got going on in the world now, we're a few years post-COVID, and how organizations have had to create entirely new systems of doing things. We've got racial violence, we've got environmental disasters happening all over the place, we've got war, we've got huge political upheaval and unrest globally, we've got stock markets and financial situations crashing because of tariffs and things that the president of the United States has introduced. It's a pretty unstable place at the moment, the world. So I think knowing that we carry all of that stuff in the front door when we turn up to go to work is really important for an organization if they want to invest in their staff and they want to hold them, right? We've also got that institutional betrayal and the psychological safety that we struggle to bring into that institutional betrayal. And that's a very real lived experience for a lot of people, not just on a bigger scale, but sometimes on a smaller scale when you have reached out and tried to create change or to speak up and voice that some behavior is not acceptable or something's happened, and, the organization rallies against you as the whistleblower. That's really difficult for organizations to come back from. So for all of those reasons and more, it's important for an organization to be trauma informed. Why is it hard? Why, if this is the gold standard of stuff that we're working towards, what makes it so hard to do this, right? I think as the lines between work and home are a little bit blurred with big percentages of people working from home, organisations have really struggled to find the right ways to support their staff and to provide leadership. We all feel a bit more confident about our work when we understand the rules. And if the policies and the values that an organisation has got in place are in name only and they don't really live into those values, it starts creating a bit of a sense of unease. You kind of feel like the organisation doesn't practice what it preaches. I won't bang on about it tonight. I might actually talk about it in the new year, given in the new quarter after we come back from the break, given that we want to talk about assignment tonight. But there is this concept as well of moral injury, which is a little bit like vicarious trauma, but it stems from specifically when the organisation has asked you to step outside your morals or has asked you to act in a way that violates your morals or your values. So not just, working overtime, working on weekends and burning you out in that perspective, but really challenging, I didn't sign up to do that kind of heavy feeling that you take home. So the trauma-informed organisation ideally really should be having policies and procedures that support their employees. They should be widely known. It should be a case of, clicking on an intranet and being able to find a policy about something. That people should be trained in those policies. You're going to know about them, right? Like, there's no point having a mandate or a policy about some support that you're entitled to if nobody knows that you're entitled to it. There's often, I think, tangible forms of support that people need in times of trauma and distress. So things like a referral to medical information or mental health resources. In severe cases, it might be something like assistance with a funeral and other expenses that come up when somebody has died. There's some really good organisations that provide access to different types of leave, or who will send out a collective email when something community-based has happened and say, this has been a big shock to our community, and if people are struggling individually, that's okay, and we're here, and there are some support options for you. When they are not clear, the organisation is not practicing in a trauma-informed way. There's ways of validating people's experience, but I think there's many organisations, and I think usually they're big agencies and departments and corporations who don't do it well, because the more people you have, generally speaking, the more policies and the more mandates and the more bits and pieces that you've got kind of circulating at any given time. So they get a bit lost, I think. The physical environment is also a really important thing to consider. Crystal, yeah, that's unfortunate, mate. Like, there'd be travel and all sorts of things that people would have to take into account, heading to something, family funerals and things like that. So I think that's really tough. It's also, there's the balance between women in the workplace and, the types of leave that you're entitled to if you've had a miscarriage as opposed to a stillbirth. And look, it's HR stuff, it's nitty gritty. It's not my field, but I think there has to be a recognition that people's individual circumstances don't often fit into a nice, neat HR box of, yep, you're entitled to 12 hours of this leave. That's really good. It's nice that they give you that leave, I guess. Like, it's probably never going to be enough, is it really, to acknowledge that? And I suppose I talk about this a lot in another subject, but it's that the recognition for the cultural load that First Nations people carry in an organisation, and the expectation, if you're not working in an Aboriginal-led organisation, but if you're working in a big clunky organisation or department, it's kind of that load that you carry, that people have to keep approaching you saying, oh, can you do the acknowledgement today? Oh, can you organise like something for NAIDOC week or something that you're not compensated for and doesn't actually fall into your job role and carries a lot of weight and responsibility. And yeah, there's that kind of stuff as well that I think is not often acknowledged in an organisation that's not trauma informed, and how difficult that can be for some people carrying that within community, depending on, where you work. What was I saying? So I think physical environment, if you've got a really open plan office and there's very little opportunity for privacy, that's not creating an organization where people have got space to, take time for themselves. I think if you've got lots of little offices, that often makes it hard for people to connect with each other as well. So it's that balance of, how do you get the physical environment right? I think when bad behavior or poor behavior is not addressed, it becomes contagious very quickly. So we call it some people call it the negative Nancy's, but other people kind of call it the Ain't It Awful Club, that there's usually one person or a couple of people in an organization that don't really want to be there anymore, but also don't want to leave. And they create this bit of a negative, toxic kind of space in the organization. And if that's not shut down quickly, it gets contagious, and it becomes difficult for an organisation to sit in a trauma-informed space when there's so much toxicity out kind of in the workplace. And then we spoke about that when an institution that you trust or depend on mistreats you, and the concept of moral injury. So I think really the takeaway is that the way that an organisation supports people during periods of trauma can be very powerful. The ramifications can be quite long lasting. I know of a couple of organisations that closed down for a few days after the no vote, or the yes vote, the no vote happened. And everyone just needed a little bit of time and space to heal as much as they could from, the rawness of that, which was nice to see. I know the organisation that sits with the child abuse unit that looks at the internet exploitation material, they do this stuff quite well. Lots of room for improvement, obviously, but I think they're well on their way. They have scheduled breaks. They have areas where people can go and play a PlayStation, play a game of pool, sit and listen to some music or something, just to kind of process and debrief all of the imagery that they have to see every shift. They have quite structured built-in debriefing opportunities and things like that as well. So there are some organisations that are really on their way to knowing what their staff need and being responsive to that. Okay, Kotter's eight steps to change. You don't need to remember lots about this. I'm just kind of running through different types of models. This particular one comes from the work of SAMHSA, so the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the US. That's their kind of leading US government department that works in the trauma space. So it's a bit like their version of Blue Knot over here. And they endorse the same trauma-informed principles. This is their sort of 8 steps to change. So they work from this framework that any change in an organisation takes time. Nothing happens quickly. And the bigger the organisation, the longer it takes to implement and really bed down change. So it's not just a case of let's do a 3-hour trauma-informed training session and change a couple of our policies. Think about how hard it is to change the culture in an organisation. Hi, Lavangi. Yeah, you need a bit of a sense within the organisation that the benefits of investing in this, like an investment in the vision that is the trauma-informed workplace, you need that. You need the investment. You need some champions in the workforce who understand why this is important. So that when you've got the naysayers and the Ain't It Awful Club and the people that go, we tried this and it didn't work, and there's always one, they can shut that down and stop that from, spreading out. So Kotter's model kind of talks about how you create the vision, how you empower other people, how you get short-term wins. In child protection, they call that runs on the board. So you create, small goals and you try and tick those off because it motivates people. If people think, oh, look at that, we said we were going to do this and we're doing that, and it makes people feel like they're on their way to something, right? So even though it's a long game, it makes people feel like they can accomplish things a little bit quicker. They need to see quick wins. Then they would say we need to look at building in flexibility. or change our approach if we need to. You know, you need to come back and say, okay, well, this isn't really working. We don't want to change the goalposts. We actually just need to change the game. We need to change the game plan. Also understanding from this model, you know, implementation of a change is not a linear process. It doesn't go from A to Z nicely. It might jump back and forward. It might mean that, you know, when you're looking at your short-term wins, you need to go back and communicate the vision to people again. Remember why we're doing this. Remember why this is important. And then you have to, I guess, have the patience for people's knowledge and skills to develop. And, you know, everything's clunky when you try it the first time. You try something, you get it wrong, you go back, you debrief about how you maybe could have done it better. And then you sort of have to plan to implement those through leadership as well. So that's the Kotter stage. Let's look at these guiding principles, right? So this came from SAMHSA as well. And you'll notice that these are the same principles that Blue Knot follow, and they're the same principles that we follow here. These are the principles that organizations are striving or should be striving to set up within. So you have safety. So throughout the organization, staff and clients, whether they're children or adults, but, you know, both parties feel not just physically safe, but psychologically safe. So you've got a physical setting that's safe and is accessible to everyone that wants to access the service, that there's mobility aids and things like that if they need to be. But also that the interactions that people have, those interpersonal interactions, promote a sense of safety as well. So these are the things we spoke about at the beginning, and have been kind of drip feeding throughout the unit in terms of like valuing staff, investing in their safety and well-being, creating that psychologically safe workplace where, you know, any type of toxicity, bullying, harassment is shut down quickly. People need to see that that stuff doesn't have a space for it to feel safe. Likewise, trustworthiness and transparency, and you'll kind of see that all of these principles, they lean into each other. So sometimes you'll come up with something and think, oh, which one does that fit into? It's kind of all of it, right? So if we want people to feel safe, we as practitioners need to be trustworthy as well, and we need to be transparent about something. So if we meet with someone for the first time and say, hey, mate, like this is my role in the organization, these are the bits that I can do, and these are the bits that I can't do. And when we're working together, I might take some notes. And if you're okay with that, you know, you can screenshot it on your mobile at the end of the session so you kind of know what I've written down and you're not sitting there wondering, you know, if I'm keeping things from you. Trying to be as transparent as we can, letting people know this is what's going to happen today. You know, same principle that I follow every week when we do our workshops. This is the agenda this week. So nobody's kind of sitting there going, oh God, didn't know we were going to talk about that. Okay, that's really triggering. I don't feel safe right now. Let people know, here's what's coming next, right? It builds that trustworthiness. It means that that person's got your back and that you can feel safe to know that, you know, walking alongside that person means that they're really truly walking alongside you. So the idea is kind of building and maintaining trust with clients, their family members, the staff, the other people involved in the organization. It can be something like recruitment, right? Which is often a real bone of contention for organizations. I often, when I meet with people or I talk about, you know, what are the real things that bug you about working here, they will say things like, you know, such and such got a promotion and it wasn't very clear why. I think it was just because old mate liked him, or the manager, you know, tapped him on the shoulder. There wasn't any EOI process that went out. So those decisions that the organization makes, even on a small level, are not transparent. So it creates distrust. You know, when the interview and the decision-making process isn't clear, people ask questions. It can also be around workloads and leadership and how work is allocated and policy decisions and the reason for change. You know, like I mean, I've worked in an organization where the teams shifted around all the time. People had to change managers, you know, that they sometimes they got bumped into a completely different area of the organization for not really much reason. Just, oh, we're going to shake things up a bit. That undermines the safety of employees, you know, when the reasons for those changes aren't clear, when they're not communicated in a way that's respectful to the employee. and just announced, oh, hey, Amanda, your team's going to do this now, it undermines you. It makes people feel unsafe in their role. So similarly for training and secondment opportunities, I think when people start feeling like those decisions or opportunities aren't given in a fair way or transparent, rationale behind it, it can turn toxic really quickly. So that stuff's really important in an organization. And I guess as a bit of homework, try and keep it in your mind and reflect on what are the things that have happened in my organization or a previous organization that have really undermined the trustworthiness and the transparency, and what was the outcome. And I bet you come back to, well, I didn't feel very safe, didn't feel like my job was secure, didn't feel like my role was secure, something along those lines. Okay, bit croaky tonight, sorry, it's the weather, I think. Peer support. So peer support and mutual self-help are really important parts of being a trauma-informed service. Like I said about the Vicki Reynolds stuff, when you establish hope and trust in a workforce that knows they can rely on each other and knows that they are there for each other, it's a collaborative workforce. So it kind of leads into collaboration and mutuality, right? It utilizes people's stories, it values lived experience. And usually in a trauma-informed model, when we talk about peers, it does refer to people that have got lived experience of trauma, or particular relevant lived experience of trauma to the organisation. Or in the case of children, it might be family members that have experienced traumatic events, but they're key caregivers in their recovery. So it's really somebody who's got a vested interest in the healing process and recovering process of the other person. There are organisations that have this down pat. There are people with lived experience on their board, their steering committees. They have consultation very regularly. They might have a children and youth advisory panel where, maybe kids that have left care or kids with living with disability that have a lived experience of, an education department might come in and consult on a policy or a decision with a panel about, is that going to land well? Is it going to have meaning to the group of people that we're trying to implement it for? There's no point advocating for a policy change if it's not actually going to mean anything on the ground, right? And I think it's funny, like it's a timely conversation with the election and everything coming up and all of this policy stuff that's going on in the news media and thrust down our throats when it comes time for voting. We can talk a lot about policy change and mandates and all of that kind of stuff, and it might sound great on paper, but if it's not actually going to mean anything to the people that you're changing it for, there's no point, right? It's a change in name only. There's been lots of peer support lived experience in things like the recent conversations and criminalisation of coercive control. So that's an area that we've had lots of lived experience input into. Lots of families of women who've been murdered by partners have stepped forward to have input into that space. So that's a good example of where we're using peer support well. And I guess, like I said, hand in hand with that goes collaboration. So the importance is placed on partnering together, sharing power. So power with, not power over. And that goes to staff as well as clients. So, accepting that people in administration and clerical staff are also going to experience, trauma from the clients that the organisation is servicing, not just practitioners. And that, healing happens in relationships. That's part of the human connection. So if we share power and decision making in a collaborative way, in a meaningful way, then, we recognise that everyone's got a bit of a role to play, I guess, in trauma-informed work, as cushy as that sounds. Empowerment and voice and choice is around the clients that you serve, the practitioners that work there, having as much voice and choice as possible. This is the strengths-based stuff when you start talking about empowerment. So recognizing that people have their own inherent strengths and don't need to be told how to do something, that they are the master of their own world and generally know what's best for them. But also, stepping outside just that macro level of practitioner and client and really unpacking the importance of a power differential, historically when the client base or the community has been diminished in voice and choice and are often the recipients of maybe organizational coercive treatment or historical treatment. So how do we bring that into shared decision making? How do we create choice and voice? How do we have an Aboriginal case management policy without consulting community? So it's really living into that value, and making sure that we're cultivating people's self-advocacy skills, because ultimately we want people to leave the service being able to advocate for themselves. We don't want to be, the expert or the boss. So we're facilitators of recovery rather than the controllers of recovery, I suppose. So again, staff as well. Staff are empowered to do their work as much as possible. There's organizational support behind that. And I think, there's that parallel process of when staff feel safe that tends to flow out, as you said, Amanda, onto the people that are receiving the services. So it's unpacking what organizational support is offered to the staff. And again, we come back to policies and supervision and leave entitlements and well-being policy and procedures, and duty of care. So how those decisions are made to, perhaps allow frontline workers to step away from frontline work into some other type of role to refill their energy tanks and have a break, and still acknowledge that we really respect their knowledge and what they bring to the organisation, rather than just having them leave because they're cooked and need a break. Okay, and finally, the organisation actively, voicing their no tolerance for cultural stereotypes and biases, making sure that there is access to gender responsive services. This could be around leveraging the healing value of traditional cultural connections and taking time, and I know some organisations in communities like Port Macquarie and Kempsey do this really well. I think the Sydney-based ones are quite far behind in this respect, but taking time, instead of having a staff meeting, in the office, go and have it at a coffee shop and sit out the front and try and catch the local elders or meet with community and allow them to have that collaborative, build that partnership, rather than sitting in a stark office that's got power attached to it by definition, and inviting people into that very intrusive, intimidating environment and saying, oh yeah, can you tell us how to do this better? And they're not actually doing it. So, things like that. How do we acknowledge those gender issues? How do we acknowledge the historical issues that impact on the client base and the staff that we're sitting with? Okay, I'm going to give you a few little prompts now, and then we'll talk about assignment 2, because I think there's a lot of meat in this and I don't want to overcook you. So in terms of implementation prompts, something that an organisation might sit down and have a chat about in a leadership meeting to say, where are we on the trauma-informed kind of scale? How do our HR policies attend to the impact of people who've experienced trauma, right? So how do our HR policies actively respond to and prevent further trauma in our staff community? How do our policies and procedures actually mention trauma? Do they mention it at all? Do we have a trauma in safety and confidentiality? Force who is a present victim of violence, how do we protect their confidence. Policies demonstrate a commitment to staff training, right, on services and supports that are culturally relevant and trauma informed. So how do we bed this down from the minute people walk through the door? And then in terms of safety, a couple of extra prompts that you're entitled to access if you need a bit of a debrief and don't want to speak to your boss, right? Oh, are people not hearing me properly? Am I cutting out for you, Amanda?
Yes, even for me.
Oh no, that's not
Yeah,
good.
I was thinking it was my internet because I was trying to talk to you before and it wasn't working. So
Oh yeah, no, I couldn't hear you. What if I turn my face off? Is that a bit better? I've got to talk, otherwise you won't have a point of reference. Is that slightly better?
Yes.
I might leave my camera off then for the rest of the workshop and just see how that goes. Sorry. Let me know if that happens next time. Let me know early and I'll see what I can do to try and improve the quality of it. I'm so glad I pay stupid amounts of money to Telstra every month for great internet. Okay, so they will look just some implementation prompts that organizations can sit back and have a bit of a think about, right? In terms of how are we actually meeting this need and where are the areas of improvement that we need to focus on. And then I'll leave you with this before we talk about assignment 3, it is. Our core values impact who we are, how we operate, who we hire, and how we interact with people that we care for and work with. So an organization's made up of people, right? So all we need to do as parts of an organization is to make sure that our actions and our decision making are made through a trauma-informed lens and those 6 principles, right? And we need to be aware of and reflective of our own values and what we're bringing into the organization and whether we're contributing to lateral violence or whether we're, being respectful and leaning into those trauma-informed principles too. Okay, I'm going to throw to you guys now. We've got a little bit of time. Hit me with your questions about assignment 3. So I'll quickly cover it. It's a case study. You are given a little vignette about Susan, who is 25. There is some history there for Susan in terms of childhood abuse and a disclosure that she's made. And what happened kind of as a result of her disclosure. She then moves in with grandma. And then during high school, she's having emotional outbursts. She's got trouble making friends, difficulty concentrating, and as a result, didn't complete her HSC. And now she's having some flashbacks, some disturbed sleep, some emotional outbursts, and she's come into the service for help with her relationship. So you've got 4 questions to answer, right? And if you have a look at the marking rubric, if I just copy the link and paste it into the chat, you guys should be able to just open it directly. Have a look at the rubric in terms of where your marks are allocated. So your questions are, considering the neurobiology of trauma, explain the impact of ACEs. So first you want to identify what the ACEs are that Susan has experienced. So have a look at the ACEs research. Then to ensure your initial interaction with Susan reflects an understanding of the traumatic stress response, what can you ask yourself and why? So when you're planning to sit down with Susan, understanding what her experience has been, what's important to reflect on? What might you need to be prepared for? If I talk about this subject or I see this happen or I see her body language shift, what am I looking out for to know whether she's feeling safe to continue this conversation with me or not? Explain the importance of building a positive relationship with Susan. Why is that important? Why is it, like a positive relationship? What is she going to get out of it? What's the advantage? And then to apply a trauma-informed approach to your care and practice, describe how you'll apply the 5 principles: safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. Right? So have a think about how you will create safety. How will you create trustworthiness and choice? And obviously transparency goes along with trustworthiness too. So we kind of, we've spoken about a couple of these things tonight in terms of how do you be transparent with a client? What kind of things would you need to set up with? It's 1,500 words. You've got 4 questions. And if you have a look, you've got 20% of your marks allocated to the impact of ACEs on neurobiology. So that's a fair amount. You've got 10% on the trauma-informed worker's reflective response and explanation. You've got 20% on building a positive relationship and 30% on the application of trauma-informed principles to practice. So the bulk of your marks are in 0.4, 0.3, and 0.1. So that's where I would allocate the most of your words as well, if that makes sense. So I would write all of your ideas down, flesh them out, and then cull your words and go back and ensure that the bulk of your words are answering what the percentage weight is. Does that make sense? Yes, no? Can anyone still hear me? Yep, cool, thumbs up. So does anyone have any specific questions you want me to answer? No? Nothing specific? Okay, it is due the week that you come back. So because we're lucky, because we're a Monday night class, you've got all week ahead of you. So in week 10, when we come back for the workshop, I will open up for more questions and answers for anybody that's been sitting with something. But I really would encourage you, and for those people that are listening as well and not here live tonight, to have a really good think and a really good kind of plan in place about that. Have an outline, kind of put some dot points in terms of what you think you might talk about, and ask me any questions this week. I'm out of the office on Thursday. We've got our TAFE graduation ceremony. So if you email me Thursday morning and I haven't replied, don't panic. I'm back on Friday, but Friday's the last day then for a fortnight. So you won't be able to ask anything really assignment specific until we come back at the beginning of week 10. So try and have a look through that stuff and ask your questions early. I'll obviously be on email all week this week, so hit me with any questions that you may need. Outside of that, that's all I've got for you guys tonight. I'm sorry that there was... That's okay. I'm sorry about the internet issues. I'm not sure why. I'll kind of have a bit of a look at it on my end. That's a bit frustrating. Hopefully the recording comes out okay. And if you feel like you've missed something, you can pop back and have a squizzy. Okay. I might finish it there. Hey, it's a bit hard when you can't see me to know when I'm done, but I might finish it there, and then yeah, let me know, sing out if you've got any questions through the week. Otherwise, have a great break. All of you, thanks for jumping in tonight and persevering with crappy internet. Lavanga, jump in, hun.
Not related to this, Carly, do you think you would have some time tomorrow just to talk to you tomorrow about the other thing?
Oh, fields of practice?
Yeah.
I can give you a call tomorrow.
Thank you.
No problems.
Bye.
Okay, take care, everyone. Enjoy your break.
Thank you.
See you in a fortnight.